Mitchell and Andrew could only handle that at a pinch, but the problem with the Americans could only be dealt with by David Audley, whose own private links with the CIA would have to be cashed in when he got back from leave. So he would have to give St. John Latimer carte blanche at Cheltenham. The more he disliked Latimer, who hated Audley, the more he inconveniently needed both of them to do what had to be done, even though Audley coveted that job. But for the moment, it was Jane who mattered. "Tell me, darling." This time he managed something close to encouragement, if not sympathy. "Yes." Some other process of reasoning, very different in content but equal in duration and sufficient to nerve her to answer him, animated Jane. "Father, you remember when I took the little car last week?" As though summoned by the memory, Sally breezed out of the kitchen into the breakfast room, carrying her enormous horsewoman's breakfast. "I remember, it was last Saturday to be exact," Sally agreed, "because I had to get a lift to the Gymkhana the other side of Winchester that day." "Go and eat in the kitchen, Sal." Jane looked up at her sister uncompromisingly. "I've got business to transact with Father." Sally gave her younger sibling one quick, sharp glance, and then picked up the plate again, and was gone before Butler could say a word. And that, if anything had been required to consolidate Butler's disquiet, confirmed it beyond question. However much they might be at odds on day-to-day matters, they never failed to decode each other's most urgent signals in an emergency. Silly was what worried him now, because where Sally and Diana were given to hyperbole, Jane's weakness was understatement, so that she would not admit to being unwell until she was too ill to walk. Suddenly, he found himself simultaneously suppressing reasons for panic while discounting them. She was only 19 years old, but hard-headed and sensible with it. But she was still only 19 years old. The Mini was still in pristine condition. He had washed it himself on Sunday, and it bore no marks of any chance encounters, and Jane wasn't the hit-and-run type. Or... No. Butler had staked his life on several occasions when the odds were better not computed. But he was quite happy to stake it again this morning across the breakfast table that his youngest daughter wasn't pregnant. All the known facts of circumstance and character were against it, apart from the cheerfulness of her greeting only a few minutes before. Only a few minutes before. Butler's eyes dropped to the table, to beside her plate. One letter, but handwritten, not official. Just a few lines on a single sheet of paper, without even an address so far as he could see at the distance and upside down. Hardly more than a brief scrawl, but signed with a flourish. He raised his eyes to meet hers, with his imagination up against a blank wall of incomprehension. "I went to see David, Father." "David?" Jane had no boyfriend named David. In fact, Jane had no boyfriend, full stop. "Uncle David, Father." Butler was there as she spoke. David was David Audley. And somewhat to his surprise, that in itself was reassuring. No matter how eccentric, even maverick Audley might be in professional matters, when it came to Jane, he had no doubt that the man would behave responsibly. Even with the untimely death of Jane's godfather, Audley rather quaintly regarded himself as an unofficial substitute for that role, for which only one other parent had regarded him suitable, to his chagrin. So, for once at least, and in this instance in particular, Audley could be trusted. Surely. He looked at Jane. "You went to see David Audley?" "About Becky, Father. Becky Smith." Jane nodded. Becky Smith. Butler repeated the name blankly, aware that he might have registered any young man's name for future reference, but that no female from school or university would have fixed herself in his mind unless he could add a face to a name, and there was no file in his memory on any Becky Smith. "Rebecca Maxwell Smith. You don't know her, Father, but I've mentioned her. She's reading law with me. We live in the same hall of residence.